Many haunted roads have scary ghost stories and legends that are often based on tragic events that never actually took place, but that isn't the case with German Church Road in the quiet Chicago suburb of Burr Ridge. Not only does the 1.5-mile-long road have a haunted history, but it's also the backdrop for one of Chicago's biggest and most shocking unsolved murder mysteries of the 1950s. Most of the road is now developed, except for one wooded area near County Line Road, and this is where late-night drivers have reported bizarre sightings decades after a gruesome discovery was made by the guardrail. On January 22nd of 1957, the frozen bodies of Barbara and Patricia Grimes were found on the roadside by construction worker Leonard Prescott, who initially thought the girls were mannequins. The Grimes sisters went missing 26 days earlier after watching an Elvis Presley film at a movie theater in Chicago, and the discovery of their bodies sent shockwaves through the nation. An autopsy report said the girls died from exposure to freezing temperatures, but the deaths were still classified as murder after puncture wounds and bruises were found on both of the girls' bodies. In the years following the terrible crime, the secluded site where the bodies were found developed a dark reputation for being haunted after a slew of ghost sightings were reported by drivers passing through the wooded area. It's unknown when the first sighting occurred, but a real ghost, believed to be one of the Grimes sisters, was allegedly seen on the side of the road near the guardrail where the bodies were discovered. There are also stories about both of the sisters appearing in the road at night and even peeking over the guardrail at drivers passing by. An even creepier sighting involves the Trinity Lutheran Church 1 minute down the road from the crime scene. The story claims that someone from the church saw two girls who resembled the Grimes sisters wandering around the church's cemetery, but when the girls were approached, they vanished. The woods surrounding Devil's Creek, below the culvert where the bodies were found, is also associated with some of the ghost stories surrounding German Church Road. The secluded property was once owned by the Werner family, who rented out an old house in the woods where the Bridle Path subdivision sits today. The home was vacated sometime around 1960, and the house eventually became a party spot for teenagers until it burned to the ground in the 1980s. Before the house mysteriously burned down, many people who went there at night claimed to have had paranormal experiences, and the place was considered to be haunted by locals. It has also been said that the Grimes sisters were murdered inside the house, and while that could be true, this has never been proven, and it's unclear if the vacant home was investigated by the police or not. One creepy story from 1982 recalls a couple who went to the abandoned house on German Church Road at night and saw a mysterious car speed up the driveway and vanish behind the house. The two quickly ran from the house and down the driveway, only to find that the barricade at the entrance was still closed, making it impossible for a vehicle to enter. The couple was greeted by the police upon exiting the property, and they told the officer what they saw, but the policeman said he was watching and assured them that no vehicle entered the driveway. Another scary story about German Church Road is the mysterious ghost car that has been seen pulling to the side of the road where the bodies were found and then speeding off like a ghostly reenactment of the crime. The suspicious vehicle, described as a 1950s-style sedan, has only been seen at night, and it was even reported to the police by local residents who thought it was a real vehicle. It's unknown if the ghost car or the apparitions of the Grimes sisters still appear in the road today, but the murder has remained unsolved ever since the bodies were discovered in the culvert over 67 years ago. In 1957, police arrested a suspect by the name of Edward Bedwell after witnesses saw him with the girls the night they disappeared. Bedwell confessed to the murder but was later released from jail after it was revealed that he was beaten by the police and forced into a confession. Even though Bedwell was seen with the girls the night they disappeared, the police had no physical evidence linking him to the crime. Another suspect, believed by many to be responsible for the grisly murder, was a 23-year-old man named Charles Melquist, who was investigated by the police but never charged with the crime. In 1958, Melquist was given 99 years in prison after confessing to the murder and decapitation of Bonnie Leigh Scott, but never faced any charges for the murder of the Grimes sisters. What's even worse is that Melquist was released from prison after serving only 8 years behind bars and later died in 2010 a free man. Although the murder is unsolved as of this video, the case remains open, and some investigators are confident the horrible crime can still be solved even if the suspects are no longer alive. Many paranormal investigations have been done at the guardrail where the bodies were found, including one in 1992 by the Ghost Research Society of Chicago. According to their website, the 1992 investigation did not produce any evidence of paranormal activity, and it's unknown if anyone has seen a ghost in the road since then. The thought of hearing disembodied weeping in a cemetery at night is downright creepy, and that's exactly what many have witnessed at Archer Woods Cemetery in the southwest suburbs of Chicago. The Weeping Lady of Archer Woods doesn't get much publicity because the story is overshadowed by Chicago's famous ghost, Resurrection Mary, but the cemetery is a regular stop on many Chicago ghost tours. The cemetery's haunted legacy mostly revolves around sightings of a mysterious woman in a white dress who's often referred to as the Weeping Lady or the Wailing Woman of Archer Woods. The ghostly woman has been seen walking across Keene Avenue from the forest across the street to the cemetery's entrance, but most of the sightings have occurred on the grounds just beyond the gates. The woman is nicknamed the Weeping Lady because the ghost has been seen and heard crying, although there seems to be more reports of people hearing the sound of crying without actually seeing the full apparition appear before them. The legend says that the weeping sound is only heard at the gates when exiting the cemetery, but according to some accounts, people have heard the eerie cries of a woman even before leaving the grounds. One creepy story recounts a group of teenagers who went to Archer Woods Cemetery late one night, not knowing anything about the haunted legend of the Weeping Lady. Two of the teens felt uneasy about going into the cemetery in the dark and decided to wait by the car while the others went inside. Not long after the other kids walked off into the darkness, the two teens waiting by the car heard the distinct sound of a woman's cries coming from the cemetery. Later, when the other kids returned to the car, the two teens were frightened when it was revealed that their friends did not make the crying sounds and were nowhere near the area where the sound was heard. They were even more frightened to learn that their friends heard the same exact weeping sound and saw a faded white figure floating over the gravestones in the area where the crying was coming from. Later that night, the teens looked up the cemetery and were shocked to learn about the ghost stories of the Weeping Lady, whom they were completely unaware of before their visit. No one knows who the mysterious woman is or why she cries, but local lore says the woman cries over the loss of her child or a long-lost husband. Some have speculated that the woman could actually be Resurrection Mary, since the cemetery is only minutes away from Archer Avenue, where the famous hitchhiking ghost roams. Another possible explanation for why the woman weeps and walks the cemetery could have something to do with the cemetery being used as a potter's field in the 1970s. Potter's fields are burial sites for the unknown, and from 1970 to 1979, hundreds of unclaimed bodies were buried in Archer Woods Cemetery after the county no longer had room to bury the dead at the previous location. Perhaps the ghost is that of a sad woman who died alone and was buried in the cemetery in an unmarked grave far away from her loved ones, maybe even before it was used as a potter's field in the 70s. Even though no one knows her identity or when she passed away, the weeping ghost is said to be a woman who died in the 1800s due to the hairstyle and the Victorian dress she was allegedly seen wearing. According to the website Find a Grave, there are graves in Archer Woods Cemetery that date back to the late 1800s, but sadly, many of these headstones are missing. Most of the older graves with headstones still standing in the cemetery date back to the 1920s and 1930s. There are a few interesting monuments in Archer Woods, including an old mausoleum, but there are no known stories connecting the mysterious ghost with anyone buried on the grounds, and her identity remains a total mystery. Another ghost story from Archer Woods Cemetery involves the sighting of an old funeral carriage that was allegedly seen by drivers on Keene Avenue many years ago. Not much is known about the sightings other than stories describing the carriage as a black horse-drawn hearse carrying a coffin through the cemetery before it vanishes. The carriage was allegedly seen at the gates as well as on the road inside the cemetery, but it's unknown when the sightings occurred and there are no witness interviews or public statements. During my daytime visit to Archer Woods, I was hoping to hear the creepy sound of the weeping while I filmed, but unfortunately that was impossible due to the never-ending sound of lawnmowers, so I decided to go back to the cemetery later that night. I sat by the entrance for a while and listened for the weeping sound in the dark, but the only thing I heard was the sound of crickets. I then decided to take a quick drive through the pitch-black cemetery, and even though I didn't see or hear the Weeping Lady, it was extremely dark and creepy driving along the gravel road. I was thinking that at any given moment she might appear in front of my vehicle or on the side of the road, but I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. If the ghost stories about the Weeping Lady are real, it's unknown if the events ended years ago or if they still happen today, but the story is still creepy and fascinating either way. If you've ever had a strange experience at Archer Woods Cemetery, leave a comment below because I'd love to hear your story. If you're interested in haunted places with unexplainable lights that appear, you've probably heard of the Paulding Light in Michigan or the mysterious ghost lights of Marfa, Texas, but unless you're from the Chicago area, you might be unaware of this lesser-known light that appears over the waters of Maple Lake, not far from the city. Maple Lake is surrounded by a massive forest near Archer Avenue, a former Indian trail known for its famous ghost stories, including Resurrection Mary. The Maple Lake Ghost Light, as it's called, has randomly appeared over the water since the 1950s, and ever since the first sighting was reported, no one has been able to explain exactly what it is and why it appears. Many people stop at this scenic overlook after dark and wait for the weird light to appear above the lake before it vanishes on the opposite shore minutes later. The mysterious glowing red light is believed to be about the size of a softball and appears randomly after dark and in the early morning hours before the sun comes up. The ghost light has been seen hovering high above the water, between the trees in the forest, and even at ground level near the shoreline of the lake. The ghost light is unpredictable, and even though appearances are few and far between these days, there were multiple reports of it in the past, including a sighting during a ghost tour in the 1970s. According to a 1979 interview with legendary haunted tour guide Richard Crow, his loaded tour bus pulled into the scenic overlook after dark, and within minutes, the creepy light appeared over Maple Lake, and everyone on board the bus saw it before it vanished. In another interview with the Chicago Tribune in 1983, Crow said he saw the ghost light 4 separate times and that it used to only appear at dawn, but then it started appearing in the early evening and even during the day at various times. There is no explanation for the strange light other than lingering legends that have been told by Chicago locals for many years. Like many of the haunted legends I've covered on my channel, there are different versions of the story, but one version says the glowing light is a lantern held by a headless man who was beheaded by Native Americans in the 1800s. The headless man allegedly carries the lantern around the lake in search of his severed head. Another version says the light is the ghost of a man who died while trying to rescue a dog that fell into a well on a nearby farm. And a third version says the ghost light is the spirit of a man who got whacked by Al Capone in the 1920s and dumped in the muddy waters of the lake. Some people have speculated that the light could actually be caused by bioluminescence or a vehicle's taillights in the distance, but most people disagree with this theory because the main road is 1.5 miles away from the lake and below the horizon. Others chalk it up to nothing more than kids playing a prank with a flare gun or a spotlight, but this is unlikely since the light has been seen at all hours of the night and even in the dead of winter when no one is in the park. On the paranormal side of things, some believe the light could be the ghost of one of the many people who were murdered in the forest or those who drowned in the 20-foot depths of the lake. Another theory points to the sad and tragic story of a man who buried a 5-month-old baby in the forest near the lake way back in 1958. This story is actually true, but little is known about the circumstances surrounding the baby's death or if the man who buried the baby in the woods was ever investigated or brought to trial. I was able to find only one newspaper article about this event, but the details of the whole story remain a mystery. Some people believe the mysterious light is the ghost of the baby that was buried in the woods because the light made its first appearance around the same time the baby was buried there. No one will ever know the true cause of the ghost light, but Maple Lake is man-made, and if the light is paranormal, it is possible that Indian burial mounds were disturbed during the excavation of the lake bottom. The land on which the lake sits was once used by Native Americans, and many native burials in this area were in fact disturbed when the nearby canal and rock quarries were excavated in the 1800s. Historical records show that it was very common for Indian skeletons to be dug up and discarded like trash during these construction projects. I talked about this in detail in my video about St. James Cemetery, which is only about 10 minutes away from the lake. The ghost light of Maple Lake is a weird and fascinating mystery and just one of the many creepy stories surrounding the Archer Avenue area of Chicago. All of the haunted locations I covered in this video are part of what's referred to as the Archer Avenue Triangle, an area that is associated with numerous ghost stories, including Resurrection Mary. I made a whole video about Resurrection Mary, and I've included a link in the description box below if you want to check it out. Let me know if you guys have ever been to any of these locations, and if you have, leave a comment below if you had a paranormal experience there. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel too, and give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. And before you go, check out the video you see on the screen.